Hey y'all. So today we're going to be finishing up chapter 14 in the book Women Who Run with the Wolves, and we're going to be reading about the last section here called the seventh stage, the wild bride and bridegroom. So yes, she opens this section by reminding us of the last part of the story in the Handless Maiden excuse me, where she says, now the king returns, and he and his mother comprehend that the devil has sabotaged their messages. The king vows a purification, to go without eating or drinking. So he's willing to do anything to find his bride, his child, and he's willing to go, it says, as far as the sky is blue. He searches for 7 years. His hands become black, his beard moldy, brown like moss. So here we see him. Here we see the king entering into an initiatory stage, much like the maiden when she had her hands chopped off, and she also had been ordered by the devil to not bathe. So she also was like that when she wandered away from her parents' property and into the orchard when she first met the king. So I find this really interesting that it's like and she mentions specifically at some point here in my reading about being uncivilized. So it's I view this all, again, this is all metaphorical, and so I view this as like from a spiritual lens, sort of like when Jesus is saying to put off the old ways when you're born again, that we are no longer bound to worldly types of rituals, and in other words, we make things have meaning as a substitute for what truly matters, which is that numinous, mystical connection that we have with the divine. And so and there's a lot of debate over this, and I feel like there always has been throughout history between different belief systems. And here you even can find division between people who say they're religious versus spiritual. So as far as valuing structure with regard to spirituality, it's kind of like that kind of sways it more towards the religious side. And I'm certainly not here to to be, the voice of, what's what. Again, I'm a seeker. We're all entitled to have our own beliefs. But I'm just giving you things to think about, like always. And so it's sort of like, I view this, since both the maiden and the king, their initiatory process, which begins at a point of descent in their journey, each one of them becomes uncivilized in some manner. And I think this is represented by, being dirty. Okay, so just some things to think about. And then that's one lens, right? That it's bad, that it's dirty, that it's uncivilized. But another lens would be more like you're getting more aligned with nature. Because nature is dirt. So it's just kind of like you can just shift around your perspective to get a deeper meaning. That's what I like to do. I like to have something to figure out, and instead of just sinking into some kind of a pre-programmed thought that came about through conditioning in my family or culture, society, whatever, I like to just position whatever this is I'm wanting to ponder here in the middle, and then just look at it from all angles. And that always gives me the most perspective, and therefore a deeper meaning and understanding that resonates for me. So again, I know it's going to be different for all of us, but that's kind of how I view that. So it talks about his beard, becoming moldy brown like moss. She's very specific to engage elements of nature in her descriptive factors here, which is part of what makes me kind of it kind of helps me to view this through that lens of becoming more aligned with nature once again, uncivilized. Stepping away from that conditioning, the cultural conditioning, the limiting, restrictive aspects of the expectations in modern society. Getting more aligned with that mystical, numinous part of us that's connected with the divine. So, yes, she goes into describing his state at that point, and then of course he is wandering, and it says, he doesn't eat or drink during this time, and this is like 7 years he's searching for them, and it says a force greater than himself helps him live. So he also comes to the inn kept by the woods people, and that's where he finds his wife. But it says, there he is covered by a veil, sleeps, and wakens to find a lovely woman and a beautiful child gazing down at him. And this is where she tells him, hey, I'm your wife, and he doesn't believe her, because when he left her, she didn't have hands. The only hands she had were the ones he had made for her, the silver hands, and instead she had human hands, because remember, they grew back. It described, in the last section, how it was like baby hands, and then little girl hands, and then woman's hands. And that, of course, is like symbolic of our grasping of these concepts as we learn and develop these aspects of our psyche and our mind. So he doesn't believe this is his wife, because he's like, you have hands. And so they go to like this trunk where they have kept the silver hands, treasured, it says, and present them to the king to prove this is in fact his wife. So it says they have a great feast. It says there is a spiritual feast, spiritual. The king, queen, and child return to the king's mother and hold a second wedding. It says here at the end, the woman who has made the sustained descent has melded together a sturdy quaternity. I had to look that up before I filmed, and then I still messed it up. It's a grouping of 4. So, so she has melded together a sturdy quaternity of spiritual powers. There we go. The kingly animus, the child self, the old wild mother, and the initiated maiden. She has been washed and purified many times. Her ego's desire for the safe life is no longer lead dog. Now this quaternity leads the psyche. So this is how we've been transformed. So she's describing that, right? It is the suffering and wandering of the king that brought about the final reunion and remarriage. Why does he, who is king of the underworld, have to wander? Is he not the king? Well, the truth of the matter is that kings too have to do psychic work, even archetypal kings. Within this tale is the old and extremely cryptic idea that when one force of the psyche changes, the others must shift as well. Here, the maiden is no longer the woman he married, no longer the frail, wandering soul. Now she is initiated. Now she knows her woman's ways in all matters. Now she is wizened with the stories and counsel of the old wild mother. She has hands. Yes. So it says, so the king must suffer to develop himself. So this is where, she's already gone through this process. And so in order for them to be equally yoked, looking at this as, as bride and groom, man and woman, husband and wife, in order for them to be truly equally yoked spiritually, now it's his turn, right, to go on a descent. And I was reminded of that Bible verse, iron sharpens iron. So it's like, when it's a right and good and true, and, you may even say, brought together by God or a higher force type of relationship, I feel like that's what's going to happen. You're going to elevate one another, but you're not going to be dependent on one another to elevate each other. It's kind of like you're both on a journey. You both have your own self-motivation and desires to better yourself, but as you're growing together, you're also helping to inspire one another to continue to grow and elevate. So that's how I view that verse, iron sharpens iron. It says, in some ways, this king remains in the underworld, but as an animus figure, which that's something you can just go off on this whole other tangent and research. There's a lot of information out there about it in the world of psychology. But as an animus figure, he represents a woman's adaptation to collective life. He carries the dominant ideas she has learned in her journey to the top side. So this is the function here in the psyche, okay? Or outer society, except he has not yet walked in her shoes. So this is where it all has to tie together to be brought forth into action, you know, in our life at this point, okay? After we've done the mental part, now we have to actually apply it. That's how I see this stage, is learning to apply all that we have learned. Okay, so, yes. He carries the dominant ideas she has learned in her journey to the top side or outer society, except he has not yet walked in her shoes. And this he must do in order to carry what she is and what she knows out into the world. So the last step is for the king to open his eyes, right? And this is always prompted by the devil. This is always prompted by some type of pressure, outer pressure. You know, I'm thinking of the formation of diamonds even. There's always some kind of like shock and awe moment, or trauma, or just pressure that has to, that catapults us into a stage of growth in life, right? So it says, after the wild mother informs him that he has been duped by the devil, he himself is plunged into his own transformation through wandering and finding, just as the maiden had been before him. He has not lost his hands, but he has lost his queen and his offspring. So the animus mimics the path of the maiden. This empathetic replay reorganizes a woman's way of being in the world. To reorient the animus in this manner is to initiate it into a woman's personal work. So the animus has essentially been retooled or reorganized to function at a new and higher level. Because if you remember, in the beginning, when all the parts of the psyche were immature and naive, in the maiden in the story, which represents us, you know, on our path in life, then the king is representative of the gatekeeper part of the psyche, which is just sort of protecting all of these other parts. So if you consider that at that stage is its only function, or his only function, then there may be actions that come about from that function of only being concerned with protecting that are not conducive to your best life. For example, we may shy away from things that are new from fear because the gatekeeper might deem those too risky. You see what I'm saying? So there's all these ways of living, because she mentions up here, her ego's desire for the safe life is no longer a lead dog. So if the gatekeeper's function, the king's function, is only to keep us safe, then again, it may keep us from actually fully living our life, or just, you know, there's all kind of things that could come about from that being the only function. It's just gatekeeper and protecting. But once these other parts of the psyche have developed, like the wolf pups, once they have been exposed to enough hardship or pressure from the outer world, unfortunately, oftentimes prompted, you know, by the darkness, then they're going to grow. They're going to become strong and wise. And so now the function of the gatekeeper has changed from being only protecting the naive and immature parts, because it doesn't have to do that anymore, to becoming a leader role. That's how I see it. Now it's in a leadership role, and as we continue to read, I think that you'll probably see how I drew that conclusion, and I'm always interested to hear your thoughts on this too. So let's move a little bit forward and see what she's got to say. So it says, the king wanders also in the forest of initiation, you know, where he's spending 7 years, right? And again, it says, you know, he doesn't eat for 7 years, and yet he is sustained. And it goes into, she says, to not be nourished has to do with reaching under our urges and appetites to some deeper meaning that stands behind and down. So we're going to get into qualities of a leader. Okay, that's how I see it. It says the king's initiation has to do with learning a kind of deepening with regard to understanding appetites, sexual and otherwise. It has to do with learning the value and balance of cycles that sustain human hope and happiness. If you think about a leader in an organization, like say, a managerial role in corporate America, or any kind of business, any kind of leadership role or managerial role, a good leader is going to understand the people that he or she is leading. Okay, and so these are the kind of things that a leader would really have a deep understanding of. Learning the value and balance of cycles that sustain human hope and happiness, because anybody who's ever been in a leadership role knows that if you can figure out what motivates your people, you're going to get the best production out of your team. And it's a win-win for everybody with that kind of mindset. And so, because money is not the only motivating factor, in a job or career. So that's how I view this development of this part of the psyche, the king character, the animus, the gatekeeper. It changes from being a gatekeeper to a leader in my eyes. So it says, additionally, since he is animus, his seeking has also to do with finding the fully initiated feminine in the psyche and keeping that as the main goal, regardless of whatever else crosses his path. So this is a lot of being able to focus on what matters. Third, his initiation into the wild self as he becomes animal in nature for 7 years, does not bathe for 7 years, is in order to peel away whatever layers of over-civilizing he has learned. The animus is doing the real work in preparation for showing and acting the true soul self of the newly initiated woman in day-to-day life. So it says, the storyline that refers to the veil being placed over the king's face while he sleeps is most likely another fragment from the old mystery rites. So she goes into talking about a sculpture in Greece, and that's something you can just Google if you want to read more about that theme throughout different fairy tales and folklore over time, being veiled, and then maybe pairing that with a search online with kings to see or the animus, to see what other stories come up for you. It says, now we see that the animus cannot be acting beneath her level of knowing. Again, they have to be equally yoked, right? Or she will become split again between what she feels and knows inwardly and how she, through her animus, behaves outwardly. So we can't have that inner conflict. We don't want that. That's what we dealt with when we were ignoring red flags and didn't want to believe what we were seeing with our own eyes. It's this inner conflict and inner resistance, and that's no way to live. So we don't want to go back to that in any manner. We want everything to be cohesive and supporting one another in our mind. We want to be whole and firmly rooted in what we believe, and have our actions be in alignment with that. And that's his role as the leader. So the animus must wander about in nature, and his own masculine nature in the forest also. Okay. So it is no wonder that both the maiden and king are caused to walk psychic lands where such processes take place. They can be learned only in the wildish nature, only next to the skin of wild woman. It is usual that a woman so initiated should find her underworld love of the wild nature surfacing in her topside world life. Psychically, she has the fragrance of wood fire about her. It is usual that she begins to act here what she has learned there. And I think that, when you go through these descents into the underworld, so to speak, and when you have gone through different stages of development in your psyche, I think that it's easier to be able to spot others who have been there too. And I think that when we consider things like, being able to recognize someone who we're equally yoked with, then I think that plays a big part in that, Yeah, it says one of the most amazing things about this long initiation is that the woman undergoing this process continues to do all the regular living of the topside life. So she's talking about how, you know, we balance just the mundane and ordinary things like household chores and, you know, all the things you have to do as a parent in life, and to keep your job going and your responsibilities in this world, the material world, being in the world, but yet we're not of it, and we're not of it more and more and more as we grow, right? So she gives kind of, you know, an expansion on those kind of thoughts. And it says, it is to her extreme credit that even though she many times wishes to, she does not drive her car into the sunset. At least not permanently. For it is this outer life that exerts the right amount of pressure to take on the underworld tasking. It is better to stay in the world during this time rather than leave it. For the tension is better, and tension makes a precious and deeply turned life that can be made no other way. Yeah. So then she goes into talking about the animus again, and how, you know, at last it says, so we see the animus in its own transformation readying to be an equal partner to the maiden and child self. At last they are reunited. Yes, and even united with the mother too. And says they have love of one another. They're all united. The attempt of the demonic to overtake the soul has failed irrevocably. The endurance of soul has been tested and met. And in real life, you know, the modern term for doing the devil's work, there's a lot of them, but I think that we're starting to understand that narcissism is just another term to describe people who are showing, you know, certain behaviors. Some of the behaviors of narcissism, it's like a tree is known by the fruit it bears. It's like these are fruits to show us who in the world is operating in darkness, no matter the mask they're wearing, no matter, you know, how bright of a light they're trying to be as part of that mask. It's just another lens to look through to understand and to discern who out there is operating from a depraved and reprobate mind. And this is all described in the Bible. It's, you know, you can look at Romans 1:28, and it just said, which is really about free will, and it just says, you know, basically, hey, God's saying, if you choose to live with this kind of mindset, then I'm going to turn you over, and so that you can live with that mindset. And I view this as like, you go ahead and serve, you know, that mindset, make that mindset your God, because you're not choosing, you know, God would be like, you're not choosing, you know, what I've laid before you as, you know, instructions for a fruitful and good and rightly aligned life with truth and integrity. It's kind of like, if that's your choice, I'm going to turn you over to that. So that's Romans 1:28, talking about that depraved and reprobate mind. Get my tongue straight today. So, and it's free will. It's free will, and we all have that choice. And so, yes, and we have to accept, you know, that it's every person's choice. And when you continue on in your journey with this awareness, and you see these behaviors from a person, I know sometimes, you know, we doubt ourselves because we think, you know, again, nobody's perfect, you know, nobody. But also, and people can make mistakes, but to me, a lie is never a mistake. And I think that if you observe a person long enough, you're going to be able to discern with more confidence if that truly is the kind of mind they're living with, you know. So, just a lot to think about. I'm thinking about expanding on this, and I'm thinking I'll probably just drop it in the description at some point. So, yeah. It says, the endurance of soul has been tested and met. A woman goes through this cycle once every 7 years, the first time very faintly, and usually one time at least very hard, and thereafter in a rather memorial or renewing sort of manner. Here at the last, let us rest now and look over the slush panorama of women's initiation and its tasks. Once we have been through the cycle, we can choose any or all tasks to renew our lives at any time and for any reason. Here are some. So she gives some examples, and to me this is like, now it's like mindful. Instead of allowing a shocking and traumatic event to be what catapults us into another descent into the underground forest to develop the psyche even more, now we can make it a mindful choice. It's we're awake and aware. And so she's talking about the tasks here, and I'm just going to read a few examples. She says, we can choose any or all tasks to renew our lives at any time and for any reason. Here are some. To bind the wounds inflicted by the poor bargain we made somewhere in our lives. To bear being misunderstood. To be severed again and again from love. To stay in the realm of the woods people for 7 years till the child is the age of reason. To wait. To regenerate the inner sight. Inner knowing, inner healing of the hands. So it's like lifting that fog so we can see clear, regenerating the inner sight. To continue onward even though one has lost all, save the spiritual child. To retrace and grasp her childhood, girlhood, and womanhood. Yes. The fact that both the handless maiden and the king suffer through the same 7 years long initiation is the common ground between feminine and masculine. It gives us a strong idea that instead of antagonism between these two forces, there can be profound love, especially if it is rooted in the seeking of one's own self. Yes, if they're on the same path, right? The Handless Maiden is a real life story about us as real women. It is not about one part of our lives, but about our entire lifetime. It teaches in essence that for women, the work is to wander into the forest over and over again. Yes. Our psyches and souls are specifically suited to this so that we can traverse the psychic underland, stopping here and here and here, listening to the voice of the old wild mother, being fed by the fruits of the Spirit, and being reunited with everything and everyone beloved by us, just like in this story. The time with Wild Woman is hard at first, to repair injured instinct, banish naivety, and over time to learn the deepest aspects of psyche and soul, to hold on to what we have learned, to not turn away, to speak out for what we stand for. All this takes a boundless and mystical endurance. Yes, it's that transitioning from innocence to maturity and a wise knowing way of operating in the world. When we come up out of the underworld after one of our undertakings there, we may appear unchanged outwardly, but inwardly we have reclaimed a vast and womanly wildness. On the surface we are still friendly, but beneath the skin we are most definitely no longer tame. So that's the end of chapter 14, and I just hope you really enjoyed that. I did. Next we have chapter 15, which is officially the last chapter in the book. It's called Shadowing Canto Hondo, the Deep Song, and it's fairly short actually. It's only a few pages, so we can probably cover this in one video. And that's it. That's it. That's the book. She has a section after that called Afterward, Story is Medicine. And she kind of is just talking about, and it's very short too, that could be one video. She says, here I will try to lay out for you some of the storytelling tradition I come from. So, you know, I just think that would be really cool to read as well. So I plan on reading those other sections for you guys, or at least reading parts of it and us talking about it. So thanks again for coming along with me today, and I just hope I've given you a lot to think about, and I just hope I've inspired you and encouraged you, and I appreciate you so much coming along this path with me, and I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I will see you again very soon.